Okay, hello everyone. With this slide, we will talk about Agile in practice, and I will focus on what we call Scrum. Scrum is a method which is very popular, and of course, first of all, I need to recall you back to the ballpoint game, the Agile game that we played together. Remember, you were having so fun, right? We throw balls to people in the team, and our goal was to throw as many balls as possible, right? So what we will discuss here is the ceremony, the process, how do we do Agile in project doing, and that one that will be focused is called Scrum method. And of course, at the end of this slide, I hope that you understand what Scrum is, and then you can apply the Scrum method to your own project doing within your team for the project of this subject, Isdm. Okay, so let's discuss. All right, with this slide, you can see that it is an overall picture of what we call Scrum. Okay, there are quite a number of people involving in this Scrum method, and I get your attention first to the first role. The first role here, this person is called a product owner. Okay, for more details, what is going to be done by each role of the people, we'll talk about that in the next slide. But product owners basically is responsible for the success of the project in the way that he or she will get inputs from the customers, from the teams, from the manager, from the executive. Actually, he is, of course, communicating with the team by involving and coordinating with other stakeholders external to the team. Then the next role is the team. The team is a cross-functional team, that is people within our Scrum team, okay? And of course, these people, they play important role to make the success of the project. We work together, we do the work, and then we solve problems together, so and so. And the next role, of course, you see here, this is called Scrum Master. He's a person who is facilitating all the process and make sure that the team is productive, the team is working to achieve the goal, that is the working software, that is the final product, and so on, okay? And also Scrum Master is the person who is leading all the activities that involve within Scrum method. All right, so these are three types of roles involved in Scrum. And then what are the activities? What do we do? Okay, first have a look here. You can see that a Scrum, we call each round of Scrum as a sprint. Okay, a sprint can be from 1 to 4 weeks. But of course, it's a fixed time. That is, of course, in Agile method. Remember, we say that it is a time-boxed iteration. That means every iteration is a fixed duration of time. So if you consider that each iteration would be 2 weeks, then we fix that. Every 2 weeks, we will finish something. Then we start another iteration for another 2 weeks and so on. And in Scrum, each time-boxed iteration, we call it sprint, okay? And usually, each sprint could be from 1 to 4. You decide. I mean, within the team, it can vary. But in our ISDM project, maybe we can agree that we will have it for a 2-week sprint. So that means we can approximately have 3 sprints until the end of the semester, something like that. Okay, so sprint is a time box iteration that we run the Scrum. Okay, and okay, what is the next thing that I need to let you understand is, okay, product backlog. Product backlog is a kind of a prioritized list of what is required to do, which could be a bug fix, which could be a feature to implement, which could be a meeting with a customer. So anything that we have to do within the team as part of the project, we list it within what we call product backlog. Then what is next? From the product backlog is everything, right? So we add more and more and more, and then of course the keyword here is that we need to prioritize. So that means we try to do the most important thing first. Okay, the most important thing could mean that the one that get the earliest deadline, the one that is the most urgent, the one that gives the most value to the product, to the software or whatever. Okay, and from this list of product backlog is a list of all the work, right, to be done. So within one sprint, let's say that our sprint is 2 weeks. So within one sprint, the team, the whole team, together with the product owner, together with the Scrum Master, at the beginning of each sprint, that means day one of the sprint, right? We will do what we call sprint planning meeting. That means everyone meet together in order to plan the sprint. So for a sprint of 2 weeks, then we all plan together that what we are going to do within this 2-week sprint. How many works from the product backlog that we can actually complete. So actually we select work from the product backlog. We select which tasks to do within the sprint. And of course, we should select the most important one to be included in the list, definitely, right? And the whole team, as a team, everyone, commit together that we will definitely try to achieve, try to complete all the tasks within our sprint. So these tasks that we get together with from the sprint planning meeting, we call it sprint backlog. Okay, that means this is a list of tasks that we as a team should finish within the sprint, the current sprint. Then after we finish the meeting, of course, the meeting is not the whole day, right? The meeting should be as short as possible. Then the team will be starting to work. And when we work within the team, each day within a sprint, what do? We do the sprint planning only one time at the beginning of the sprint. But then every day after we finish the planning, we do what is called daily stand-up meeting. Sometimes we call just stand-up meeting, somebody calls it just daily meeting. But anyway, it is a daily meeting that at the beginning of every day, everyone will stand and have a very, very short meeting. Okay, so what do we do in this daily meeting? That is, since we will meet every day, right, in the morning before we start working, everyone will say that we'll look at the sprint backlog and we'll choose the work that each member will be committed to do. So suppose our Scrum team, we have 5 people. Then each person, of course, every one of us will look at the backlog, the sprint backlog. And then we will say that for me today, I will do this work, and this work. So that work should be is supposed to be finished within a day because it's a daily plan. Okay, the other member do the same. So that means everyone will know what they are going to do on that day and try to finish within the day that those selected works or tasks. Okay, and of course, the very, very first time you might make a mistake in order to estimate that I think this task should be finished within 2 hours. Then one day we have, let's say, one working day of 8 hours. Then you select some tasks, maybe you select 3 tasks, one of 2 hours, the other of another 2, and the last one is 4 hours. Then you think that within this you can finish. all these three tasks, then you select these three, okay? And everyone do the same. So based on this, you can do the work. After this, of course, you start working, okay? Everyone, after we finish stand-up meeting, then we work on what we commit and what we plan to do, okay? So we do this daily stand-up meeting every day in the morning. So I will go into the detail. What do we discuss within the stand-up meeting, okay? And then we run this in a cycle of sub-sprint. Let's say if the sprint is 2 weeks, we run the daily meeting every day in the morning, okay? And then we plan ourselves what to do. We try to finish the work within the day and so on. The next day we plan the next work to do and so on. At the end of the sprint, the last day of sprint, we're supposed to have finished work. All the work that we plan at the beginning, remember here, this is the work we plan at the beginning. Here, the list of all the work, right? Then we're supposed to finish all those things and then we call it finished work. So once we get the finished work, of course, we do sprint review. We review that we have done a demonstration. Usually in the sprint review, we demonstrate the outcome to product owner or maybe customer. And then we also do what we call sprint retrospective, okay? Of course, we will look into the detail, but this is the overall thing, what will happen in each sprint. All right, then let's look into more and more detail of each of these. All right, as I already mentioned, right, there are 3 important Scrum roles from the previous slide. Remember, the very first role we have been talking is called product owner. This is a person, of course, who is responsible for business value of the project and for deciding what work to do, in what order, in the product backlog. So in product backlog, remember, we talk about prioritized list of work. So how can we know that which work is the most important? Of course, it has to be decided by this product owner. And how can this product owner decide which one is most important? Of course, he works with the customer, he interacts with the stakeholders involved in each of the tasks and so on, and then communicate with the team. So this is the first role. The second role is Scrum Master, okay? Scrum Master, from the name, you can guess, right? He's the person who is the master of the whole Scrum process. And of course, his responsibility is to ensure that the team is productive, okay? And he will facilitate what we call daily meeting. Remember, we have daily stand-up meeting, right? The Scrum Master will be facilitating this. He will enable close cooperation across everyone, across all roles, across all functions, okay? And try to solve conflict or whatever that prevents the whole team to be not effective. So this is very important, okay? In Scrum, there's no role called project manager, okay? But might be sometimes people could see that Scrum Master is a kind of project manager somehow, but not really 100%. Anyway, the last role is the team, the Scrum team or the development team. So that means everyone, every member, okay? And in the team, it's a kind of self-organizing team that everyone will organize themselves to work at their most effective way, right? And to produce the desired results at the end of each sprint. All right, so here these are the 3 Scrum roles. These slides summarize important terminologies. So you could see that we do have the first one, product backlog. product backlog, remember from the overall picture, right, is a list of prioritized works. Okay, could be any kind of work, could be features and functionalities to implement as well. Okay, this is called product backlog. So the entire list, of course, it can be growing. You can keep it growing. At the very beginning, maybe you don't know much, then the work within the backlog, the product backlog, may be not so many, but once the project is going on and on and on, more and more of the work is added into the backlog as well. All right, the second one is sprint backlog. So sprint backlog is, of course, a list of the highest priority items that we as a whole team, right, select and choose from the product backlog. And we plan that these tasks, these items within the sprint backlog, the whole team will work together, will try to help each other to complete the whole sprint backlog within that sprint. Remember, a sprint, one sprint is one iteration, a time-boxed iteration of a fixed period, and every sprint will have the same duration. Let's say, as I already mentioned, if you think that your sprint is 2 weeks, then every sprint will last 2 weeks and finish, and then another sprint start for 2 weeks and finish, and another and another and another sprint. Okay. Item number 3 here, burn down chart. We will have a look at this and see an example, but it's one of the important artifact or thing that we use within Scrum method as well. It is used to show work remaining to be done. Burn down. Burn down means at the starting point we have a lot of work. Then each day, day by day, of course, until the end of the sprint, you will see that this list of all the work will be decreasing, right? Because we finish more and more. At the beginning, maybe we have 100 things in a list. Then as times go by within a sprint, we have 90, 80, 70, 60, 50 remaining and so on until the end of the sprint. If everything goes very smoothly, perfectly, and our estimation of the work to be done within sprint is correct, the burn down chart should go to 0. That means we finish everything as we plan. Okay, so this is these are all the 3 items within Scrum. All right, these are another 4 terminologies that we have to understand. The first one from this slide is called story. Okay, but actually it's the 4th one from the previous slide, so I write down number 4. Okay, number 4, this is story. It's a short description of feature that if we implement, it will provide some value to the customer. Sometimes in many other article or whatever you read about Scrum, it is called user story, not just a story. A user story is a description of a feature of the thing that a user wants. Okay, we will have a look, and of course we will look at an example, how to define it, how to use it, and so on. You can think of it similar to a use case, but it's more to the user oriented, while the use case is more to the system functionality oriented. Okay, all right, item number 5, acceptance test. Okay, it's a test, of course. It's a kind of test, software testing, that is performed by the customer in order to verify that the story, the thing we implement as part of our software, has been implemented correctly and satisfactorily. Okay, so remember one of the Agile value and principle, right? We have what we call working software. In order to ensure that we have a working software and we have a happy customer, we need to make sure that our implementation, our development of a software satisfy the customer. So customer must be the person who tests and tell us what is still missing, what is still not correct, what is still not the right thing he or she wants. Okay, and this is done through an acceptance test. Usually we does an acceptance test once we finish a story or at the end of the sprint. We invite customer to join our sprint meeting, and then we demonstrate and then make an acceptance test. All right, item number 6 is business value. The value in this case is how much, it is used to quantify how important, okay, the story, the user story or the work is in the view of customer. Actually, in the product backlog or in the sprint backlog, right, you can have a lot of user stories. You can have a lot of things that the user wants, okay? Okay, so let me write this additionally. User story means description, features, things that the user wants. Okay, so the values is used to determine how important that story is. Okay, and it should be given in terms of quantifiable value so that we can compare that this story has a value 10 while the other story has the value 5. Then you know that the story with value 10 is more important. And then when we prioritize or we choose the story to implement, right, we should choose the story that has higher priority, higher value to implement first. Okay, so this is why business value is used here. Then number 7, the terminology here is called story points or the estimation, and it is used to measure how difficult, how much time maybe you need for a story to implement. So it's a kind of estimation. So once you have a story, you need to estimate how, first, what is its important, right? How much is it important? And second, how much is it in terms of difficulty? So these are the two things. And also we define how can we test the story that the user is happy as well. So these all are very much related. We will look at some example. Okay, but remember, a story or user story is a description of what a user wants the system to do. Okay, and second, acceptance test is how do we test, how do we define to test a user story that the story has been correctly implemented. And then business value, it is used to determine that how important the story is in quantifiable value. And then the last one, story points or the estimation, it is used to measure the difficulty, the complexity, how hard, how easy the story is. Some story could be very simple, but it could have high value. It doesn't mean that high value story must be difficult to implement. It can be opposite. High value could be easy to implement, or high value could be difficult to implement. Okay, there's no fixed rule. All right, so these are additional 4 terminologies that we should understand in Scrum. Then this slide lists all important Scrum ceremonies. Sometimes you can think of it as activity. So activity, but of course in the terms of the Agile and Scrum, they make it very high level. So it is called Scrum Ceremonies. Okay. So the first thing is the sprint planning. Remember, it happens the very first day of the sprint, because then you as a whole team, all the people, all the roles, Scrum Master, Scrum team, and also product owner, we must be together in the meeting to make a sprint planning so that we can select a list of work from the product backlog to implement during the sprint, and then deliver at the end of the sprint. Okay, so we select a set of work in the sprint planning. Okay, and of course, once we select this set of work, right, we put them all in what we call sprint backlog, right? Okay, then the next activity, okay, this is activity 1, is daily scrum. Sprint planning is done just once, but daily scrum is done every day within your sprint. So it is a daily stand-up meeting, right? So we're supposed to stand. The reason that we're supposed to stand is that, can you guess? Yes, you're right. We want it to be short. If you sit, you have coffee, you have snack, you have everything, you can meet for the whole day, right? And that's a waste of time. So daily stand-up meeting is supposed to be short meeting for the whole team to plan the work of the day. That within today, what we are supposed to finish. So we choose the work. Each person chooses the work for him or herself. We are not choosing the work for others, but we can suggest. But we use what we call self-organizing method. That is, there's nobody say, hey, you do this, hey, you do that, okay? In Scrum, everybody is your own boss, but we can suggest, and we can guide, and we can coach. So this is daily Scrum. The third is sprint review. This is done just once as well. That is a meeting done just once, but at the end. It's a meeting that the team demonstrate the finished work to product owner, and maybe we can invite customer as well. What has been complete during the sprint. So it is the end of the sprint, okay, this sprint review. Then the fourth one, sprint retrospective, is another meeting. It is a meeting in which the whole team, again, together, looks back to the whole sprint that has been passed for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and so on. And then we see what have been done well, what have been done not so well, what should be improved for the next sprint so that we don't have the same problem, not have the same mistake. So it is a meeting with the purpose of reviewing the actual performance of the whole team. Okay. Here we have user stories explanation. User stories are one of the primary development artifacts for Scrum and also for extreme programming. Remember, extreme programming is also one of the agile method, okay? And what you already experience as part of extreme programming is the pair programming. It's also one of the approach used there in extreme programming too. Okay, so what is a user story? It is described here as a very high definition of a requirement, but from a point of view of a user, not from a point of view of a system analyst or a developer. And it should contain just enough information so that developers can produce a reasonable estimate of how long it should take, how hard it should take to implement a user story. Okay, here is the concept, right? Let's look at some example. From here, you can see initial user stories examples, okay? The first one, for example, what are they? What is it? The first one, student can purchase monthly parking passes online. You get some idea, right? So this is very initial one. Second is parking passes can be paid via credit cards. This is another story. We can make a purchase, we can pay a purchase, then also the purchase can be paid via PayPal. Another story. And another one in a different project perhaps is professors can input student marks. This is also a user story, right? It's a description of what a user wants the system to be able to do, to support him or her to do, what the user wants to do by using the system, something like that. And another example, students can obtain their current seminar schedule. Students can order official transcripts. Students can enroll in seminars for which they have prerequisites. Transcripts will be available online via a standard browser. So these are sample stories. And usually, the person who writes user stories should be project stakeholder, product owners, users, but not developers. Because we as developers or Scrum team, we are not the one who have the requirements. How come that we write stories for them? So we should let them, that means the users, the customers, project stakeholders, to write the stories they want. These could tell us some guidelines how to write a user story appropriately in an agile way. So recall again, user story is an agile expression of a requirement. Okay, so it is a requirement from a user. It should have certain structure so that user can write it completely, correctly, systematically, structurally, somehow. And it is used to promote collaboration and also discussion so that we can discuss with the user easily in their own language. And it is a lightweight approach using simple language understood by everyone. Not like a very high-tech language that is understood by only development team. Okay, so one of the very popular pattern for writing a user story is like this. As a role, I want some action so that some business value. So how should we write it? For example, what is a role? A role is a role of the user. For example, as a student, I want to print transcript online so that I can use it for applying for jobs, internships, and so on. So this is an example, okay? So the reason we need these three components so that we know first who is the actor, which type of user, which role of user is using that story, okay? And what is the action? What will happen? Again, for requirement, it should be what will happen, not how we do it, okay? And then the last component is the business value so that we can use it to determine how much important the user story is, okay? So upon completion of the user story, how does it contribute to the whole software? Here we can see that in order to write a user story, we can define a template, a structure, so that it is easy for a user to write it down. Okay, so what do we have here? Of course, this can be defined by our team. We need to give each story an ID for reference. We need to have story title. Okay, so let's say for this example, we make it online course registration. So as the template inside the user story, we should say as a student, right? Suppose I am a student. I want to register courses online so that it is convenient and fast. Acceptance criteria, is the part that is used to define how can we know that the story is complete and it contains everything that the user wants. So it is used for testing. Okay. Later on, when developers say that I complete the story, they can be sure that they complete when they perform all the tests defined in these acceptance criteria. So I know when I'm done for this story when user can add courses online using standard browser. Okay, so let's say that I am very brief now. Actually, I should write more and more detail, okay? And also there could be some other conditions and criteria, but let make this example easy, okay? Then go to the next. What else that we have to fill in as a user story? The importance. What is it? Remember we talk about the terminology. One terminology is called business value. We should be able to identify how important of the user story compared to others. So we should agree within the team, okay, within the project, that the business value or the importance perhaps should have a range of some value from 1 to 10, where highest value means the most important one, something like that. So let's say, suppose this is our importance scale. So for this one, suppose we say that the importance is 8. Okay, kind of very high. Then what is next? Next, and how do we, okay, again, sorry. How do we identify this number 8? We, not the developer. To identify this must be defined by user, by stakeholder. We don't know how important it is, right? It must be the user who say to us how important it is. Then for the estimate, this is the thing that is related to developer now. Estimate is used to define how hard the user story is, how much effort has to be put. So it can be defined based on number of hours. So the reason it is said here as estimate, you see, sorry, it should be yellow, right? Because it's the way it is that us as a development team need to estimate together. We don't know for sure, but from experience you will be able to estimate how many hours you think this online registration story would be able to complete. You might say 5 hours, okay? And what type of story it is a kind of part of the workflow, something like this, okay? So this is example. After you know what is a user story is, right? So let's look at the whole process within a sprint. Sometimes people may use the term release and iteration, but actually when we talk about Scrum, it is just a sprint. A sprint, you might plan to release something within a sprint. It is also one iteration, okay? So what happened within that, of course, remember, the thing is customer or users will be the person writing the stories. We as developer and team, we estimate stories, estimate how hard, how much effort do we need, right? Customer plans the release. That means he or she, a customer product owner, will be the person pick up which stories to implement first, second, third, because we need to, of course, develop according to the need of the customer, right? He will be able to tell which one is the most important thing to have first. And for each story in a sprint, in a release, of course, developers implement the story, okay? Customers performs acceptance tests based on the acceptance criteria that we have defined together. But of course, in case there are some dynamicity, some changes, we accept it, right? We are in Agile. And then at the end of the sprint, we do debriefing or we do retrospective in order to learn from the past, what have been wrong, what have been right, and so on. And if we fully implement a story completely and get accepted by customer, we earn what we call business value. We earn. It's the same as producing product and sell it, right? You produce a product. Once it passed the QC, quality control, your product is of good quality, you sell it. Then you earn some money. But you can earn only when your product is finished and you satisfy the customer, there's a customer buying it, right? The same here. We earn the business value, the point that you estimate in terms of the importance. You can earn those points only when you fully complete the story and your customers are happy with the story you implement. This is important, right? Here, this is to emphasize again that customer write stories. Okay, user stories can be written and posted on a board. Okay, we talk about the board later. Post it on a board using an index card. Maybe we can print it out as well so that you can have electronic or digital archive of the story online as well. There are many of the software project management tools that allow us to write and post user stories on certain board as well. And remember, each story worth some business value that we define, right? Using in the card of the example, it is defined by the importance, okay? But it's the same, it's the business value. But we will be able to earn only when we implemented it fully and also we pass the acceptance test. And the acceptance test is tested by the customer. And remember that within each sprint, time is limited. Previously, it was about user story that customer will write it, right? Then the role of developers, of course, we do the estimation. We must estimate the effort of the user story. How much effort we need to put in order to implement the story. And as I already mentioned, you can use any numeric scale from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you can use any time scale like number of hours, number of days, something like that as well. Okay. And it can be from 1 to 6 in this example, from easiest to hardest, or you can also have something like impossible. This story is impossible to be implemented, something like that, okay? And then with this, we can easily sort or order, right, the story from easiest to hardest or vice versa. And the effort, okay, should have some meaning, relative meaning. For example, a story with effort equal to 4 compared to a story with the effort equal to 2. That means the story with effort equal to 4 must be double in terms of the difficulty, right? And should take perhaps around double of the time to develop or implement that story as well. So we should be very consistent in terms of estimate the story, and we perhaps should try to compare among different stories. For example, you have 2 or 3 stories and you think that they are about the same difficulty level. So they should all of them have the same effort estimate. Okay, not to make it so confusing, sometimes we usually use hours to define the effort. So it is the scale that you can easily relate to some realistic unit, right? In terms of hours. Now we already have user stories with the detail, right? As a role, I want to, so that this kind of structure, we have the importance, the business values of each story. We know the effort of each story. Then, which story we should include within a sprint, within a plan. This is what we define. So we say here, customer plans the release. That means customer plans the sprint backlog. We also need to estimate the whole team capacity as well. That is how many stories the whole team can do within a sprint. How many stories, how many of the effort the whole team can do, right? It can be by means of numbers, how many people you have, how many hours we have within each sprint. You can multiply and calculate, right? Then you can use this to select the stories to fit your capacity. So let's say, suppose you can, for the whole sprint of your team capacity, you have 180 hours for the sprint. Then you know that how many stories you should implement for the whole team. And then you take those many stories to be included within your sprint backlog. Okay? And that's it. And don't forget to prioritize so that we will implement, okay, the team will implement the most important story first. So to prioritize, of course, it is based on the business value. That is the importance. Not to prioritize based on the effort, right? We are not supposed to do the easiest one first or the hardest one first, but we're supposed to do the most important one first. That's it. Once we have sprint backlog, is a list of story, right? And sorted with prioritize. Okay, so one story should be chosen at a time. So suppose we choose this one. A developer implement one story at a time. Don't do multitasking, okay? And try to complete the first story from the plan, from the backlog. And we should report the progress, review the progress, update to the customer periodically. If how come later on that story goes badly, you can abandon. Okay, but of course, make sure you get customer agreement. These slides show how can we make a release plan based on a feature-driven approach. First of all, let me emphasize that it is not necessary that we must make a release after every sprint. No, we can make a release after a few sprints, after we can finish important user stories that can be combined into one software release. So in this example, look at a goal. A release goals defined here contain 3 releases. The first release is when we are able to implement stories that allow users to log in and log out. Second release is when we can implement stories that allow users to manage items. And the final release is when all stories of the software are complete, done. Okay, so based on these features, Okay, this is this is how we define when to make a release. That is when these features are complete in the first, in the second, and in the final release. So for the first release, okay, here, let's look at here. First release focuses on login and logout, and it involves these three user stories. That is story number 7, 1, and 10. And for these three stories, it has these 3 effort points estimated. That is altogether 5 effort points. And from our assumption here, okay, for this example, suppose that our team can handle 3 points per sprint. Okay, this is the team velocity, which means how many of the effort points the whole team can complete within one sprint. That is kind of the meaning that you can try to understand what does it mean by velocity and the team effort points kind of thing. So that means for this first release, since it requires 5 points, right? And our team can do 3 points per sprint. To complete all stories for first release, that means we need 2 sprints for the team, okay? How about the second release? Second release is when user can manage items, right? So it involves 5 stories here. Story 9, 2, 4, 3, and 5. Okay. And the total effort points for this release is 15. And that means with the team velocity 3, right? It requires 5 sprints to complete this second release. All right. Then how about the final release? Final release is to be done when every story, all story, right? That means starting from the story number 1 included in the first release and so on, are completed. So altogether, the total, the whole final release require us to complete everything. But basically, actually, we are working on the final release after we finish the second release, right? So actually, we are working on the remaining user stories, which are number 6 and number 8, right? And also, it requires 8 and 2 effort points, altogether 10 effort points. But in this example, it estimates for the whole stories, for all stories of the software. But anyway, it's just 10, right? But for the whole, you can see that its total is 30. All right. And this estimation is to tell us that actually for the whole software from the beginning, we will need 10 sprints altogether because the whole software requires 30 points. And we can do 3 points per sprint. That means the whole software requires 10 sprints in total. Okay. So what is our releases then? The first release is clear, right? That we can release after second sprint, sprint number 2. Okay. Second release requires us another 7 sprints. That means sprint number 7. Second release requires us another 5 sprints. And that means we can make a second release after sprint number 7. 2 plus 5 is 7. And then the final release is when everything is complete and the whole software requires altogether 10 sprints. So we can release everything after the 10 sprints. Okay, so that's it for our example of this particular software and how do we plan the release to release our version 1, version 2 of the software to the customer. This slide shows how can we make a release plan again, but based on a different approach, which is called date-driven approach. In date-driven approach, of course, the goal of the release is to release a new version of the software after a fixed period of time. So in this example, let's say that we have our goal to release a new version of the software with additional features every 6 weeks. And again, assume that our team velocity is 3 points per sprint. Okay, this is the capacity of the team to be able to complete works of 3 points per sprint, and the sprint length is 2 weeks. Okay, so based on this mean, okay, with the sprint length 2 weeks and release goal every 6 weeks, which allow us to know that we are releasing everything. We are releasing a new software after 3 sprints. So every 3 sprints, we release new software. And the 3 sprints mean 9 effort points that we can do, right? Okay. So we can make a release plan based on this date-driven. So you can see that based on these 9 points that we can do, we can finish up to this. For the story 7, 1, 10, 9, and 2, these require altogether 8 points. And that means we can release in the release number 1. After that, we can make another release when we complete around another additional 2 user stories, okay, and so and so. So you can see that with this way of planning, we can make 4 releases of the software. But of course, it is not based on the features. It is not based on the completion of certain features, but based on the time to make a new release. And this is just 2 different approaches that we can make use of for release planning. How about sprint planning? We already talked about release planning, right? And one release of a software, of a new version of software, may require a few sprints. And then we need to really look into the detail. How can we make a sprint planning? Recall that we have here, right, product backlog. It includes all the user stories that should be implemented. And it is sorted by priority. That means highest priority first. And also it has story points, effort points. Okay. From these product backlog, of course, we need to do a sprint backlog during the sprint planning. That means what kind of stories, what are those stories that we plan to finish and complete within this particular sprint. This is what we have to do in the sprint planning. And of course, remember, for the sprint planning, we have all the people together to do the plan, including product owner, including Scrum Master, and development team. So what do? Definitely, we need to first select stories from the product backlog. Okay, and of course, we select highest priorities very first. Okay, second, we do identifying the task to realize a selected story, because some story could be big, right, and could require a lot of effort. So we need to break down the story into smaller tasks so that development teams can approach each task. Okay, so let's look at this example of story 10 that we choose to be in our sprint backlog, right? It's the highest priority. It requires certain amount of time to work. Of course, in the product backlog here, you may see that actually it requires 13 effort points. Okay, but here it requires 40 hours effort. Actually, we can calculate this to be different points, different values, or sometimes in the Scrum team, sometimes they use the same thing. That is, effort points is defined in a way that reflects the number of hours to be used, something like that. Okay, but in this example, we use different Okay. And then that means in the step number 3, we need to estimate actually for a particular story that we choose how long you think that the team think that we require to complete the story. And after we break down, of course, okay, it has to be the tasks that sum up or cumulatively its total hour of the whole story. So let's say this story number 10, it is broken down into 3 tasks, and each task requires 8 hours, and also 24 hours. Similarly, if we look at story 2, okay, story 2 is also broken down into 3 tasks, which requires 16, 8 and 8 hours, and altogether 32 total hours, and so on. Then we can do the same for each of the selected story in the sprint backlog. Okay. Of course, we need to make sure that these total hours we have for all stories in the sprint backlog are kind of consistent with the team capacity, right? We should not end up with selecting too many stories that the whole team cannot finish within one sprint, and we should not end up with selecting too less stories that make the team having too much time, something like that. Okay, so this is the task that Scrum Master will need to validate as well, okay, to make sure that the total estimated work against the total team capacity are consistent. Okay, so actually you can know, right, if you estimate number of hours, you know how many people you have in the team. So number of people times productive hours per day times number of days per sprint. This should be the total hours of the sprint backlog for the effort that we can have for all stories. So this is the way, and you should try to make similar way when you plan your own sprint in the team as well. And again, don't worry, the very first time of making estimation, you may make, not you can, but you may make, and you would make, and you will see that you will make mistakes. We have heard of the term velocities from previous slides already, right? So let's look at velocity in more detail, okay? As we already discussed, right? Velocity is how much work the whole team can do in one iteration. One iteration in Scrum is what? Sprint, yes. Okay, it is a sprint in Scrum method. And velocity is very important because it can tell us how much work we can do in one sprint, and then it can allow us to make a planning of a sprint very accurate if we know the team velocity. So this is what is emphasized here. As your velocity stabilizes, the planning can deliver more accurate iteration plans or sprint plan. And if the estimate is very correct, right, and consistent, your whole plan will be correct. And the estimation, like what user stories, how many user stories you can finish in one sprint, how many sprints it requires to finish some feature in a release. This can be, once it can be very accurate, it is very good for the team and very good for the customer. So why velocity will not be stabilized? Actually, for a team, when everyone in a team is very new, or maybe even some new members join the team, right? Working together may need some adaptation to each other. The collaboration may not done pretty well. Work efficiency may not be so good. And that means the velocity of the very first sprint may be low. Once you know how to work effectively Once you know the team, once the collaboration among every member is very good, velocity of the team increases. And when the team work for a certain period of time, definitely we expect that the velocity of the team should be stable. And once you have stable velocity, planning of the release, planning of the sprints will become easy and accurate. So, how can we calculate the velocity of the team? Of course, velocity of the team by the definition, right? It's a capacity, how much work the team can do, how much story points, how much effort points the team can do in one iteration. And we are talking about the whole team, not a particular specific member, okay? So here it is. Velocity is equal to total number of story points, effort points per iteration. So you need to estimate and calculate, right? That in each iteration, how many story points you have been complete, you can complete. And again, when we calculate and we earn the point, we can only earn the points of stories that we complete. Partially complete story or work is not counting. Okay, so you can see here, as I already mentioned previously, that velocity of the team may not be very stable in the very beginning, but it should move to a very stable point after a certain period of time, after the teamwork is getting well, people collaborate well, people work more efficiently, and so on. So this diagram, you can see, it is the estimate of the team velocity and plot as a graph. So you can see that for the very first iteration here, okay, number of points the whole team can make is pretty low, just 10. Second iteration, something is improving, but then the third iteration, it's decreasing. Many things can happen actually. It could be the case that some member leave the team. It could be the case that some members get sick, right? Then you have less people, then the whole velocity of the whole team is reducing. And it could be the case that you are replacing one person by another, and the new person that joined the team may not be able to work well yet, right? And once the team is stable, members are not changing, and you know how to work together pretty well, you understand each other, then velocity should be pretty stable. And once you know the velocity and it is already very stable, let's say that here it seems to be that the team velocity is about 30. Then you can use this to estimate your sprint easily. You know that your team can do 30 effort points per sprint as a whole. Then when you choose user stories to be included in sprint backlog, you choose them somehow that the total effort points for all stories within one sprint in the sprint backlog should be around 30, more or less, right? And that's it. Another important concept we need to understand is called burn down chart. Burn down chart is a graphical representation of work left to do versus the time, which means that it shows us the work remaining and the time we still have, and then we can see a trend that how much time we should take, how much more sprints, how many more sprints we still need to do in order to complete the whole project. Okay, so let's have a look at some example. From this example, you can see that the vertical axis, okay, will show the effort points. while the horizontal axis will show the time. So this is a chart about work remaining versus time. The effort points, actually the work remaining is represented through effort points. So this is the whole effort points of the project. Let's say that suppose the whole project requires 160 effort points, and we have each iteration, right? Iteration 1, iteration 2, iteration 3. Each iteration means a sprint. So if after sprint number 1 you can finish 10 points, then at the starting point of sprint number 2 you have 10 points less out of 160, right? And then after sprint number 3 you also have done another 10 points as a team velocity, and so on. Okay, so in this chart this is kind of ideal. Let's say that the team velocity is 10, that, and also we have altogether 160 points as a total, right? So by this simple calculation we know that so far we would need 16 sprints or 16 iterations to complete the whole project. Again, with the assumption that team velocity is 10, and with the assumption again that team velocity is stable and accurate. From this chart, of course, we will need to plot 2 lines at least. The ideal line, the one that really we want it to happen based on the estimated team velocity. And then from this line, you know that altogether you need how long time, right? Let's say that it's about iteration 16. So we estimate that 16 sprints is required. And you can see that when times go by, when we have more and more sprints, iteration, the work remaining, okay, must be reduced. Okay, this you can see, this is work remaining after sprint, some sprint, and if suppose we are here, we know that these are all the work remaining, and for this part, these are work that have done so far from iteration number 1 to iteration star. Okay, so from n iteration we have done this much of work, and then we require this amount of work to be done later, in later sprint. This burn down chart example is very interesting. Let me discuss this briefly. First, look at this dashed line. This dashed line is supposed to represent what we call expected burn down. And how do we draw expected burn down? Of course, it is based on the estimated. We need to have estimated velocity, right, of the team. And at the beginning, we should be able to estimate from the product backlog altogether how many of the effort points are required for the entire project. So this is the entire project effort point. Okay, then you can draw this estimated burn down easily, right? Based on the estimated velocity, based on the entire project efforts we have at the beginning. And then what are the other things on this diagram, on this chart? The other things represent, especially the box plot, represent the reality, represent how much work you can really do in each iteration. Iteration 1, 2, 3, and 4, for example. Starting at iteration 1, of course, we start from the entire project has nothing done yet. So that means all the entire project effort are still there, right? The full efforts are required for the entire project. Once you complete iteration 1 and start iteration 2, you can see that certain work has been done. That means there is some reduction of the work remaining. So each box plot represents the remaining work at the beginning of each iteration. So if we look at this iteration 3, you can see that the remaining work is here, the total, okay, because certain works have already been done into iteration 1 and 2, okay. And of course, you can compare the reality in the box against the expected burn down line. So you can see that from iteration 1, 2, 3, okay, we could only achieve velocity of 10, 14, and 12, but that's supposed to be not big enough compared to the estimated velocity that you have done at the beginning. You must have estimated something much bigger, because then you can see the gap, right? Here is the gap. In iteration 4, starting of iteration 4, you're supposed to reduce the work up to this point, but in reality, you reduce it up to only this point. So the gap is this high. This is the work that you cannot accomplish according to the plan, to the estimated, to the expectation. So that is why it is said here, oh no, we are not going as fast as we expected. Okay, and that means you need to realize that perhaps the real velocity of the team is not that high. We estimated it's something here, right? Maybe it's too high. We need to reduce it to some certain value. So based on these 3 iterations that has passed, you may think that the real velocity of the team should be something like this. This is more realistic. Then you draw the entire line as a new one. Okay. And if things go as expected, you should be able to complete everything at the end of this sprint or iterations. But of course, in the real project doing, sometimes things are not according to the expectation, such as this one. How come that work increased? From this iteration, we finished the work up to here, but then the starting of the next iteration, we have some increment here. So this is supposed to reflect new requirements from the user. User add more work, and we supposed to accept it, right? According to Agile principle. Actually, it may not be that the user add more work, but it may be that we underestimate, or we ignore, or we forgot some work, and then we finally find out later that, oh, these are the work that we have to do, but we didn't include it in the product backlog at the beginning. So you include it here. Okay, so again, more work, more effort required, right? But still the time is fixed already. Then somehow we can manage to continue working at the very similar velocity, okay? But in this sprint, you can see there's a big gap. That means, wow, the work has been done quite a lot compared to previous iterations. And you can see that what happened. Oh, there are some new innovation developed by one of our team. Maybe he can think of a new way to do the programming, the coding. He find a new framework library that we can reuse, and we can develop the software faster, something like that. Okay. And how come that this has no work done at all? Because actually in reality, again, in real project doing, there might be the case that you found some bugs, for previously finished work, user stories that you think you already finished, you're done, you complete everything, you might find out later that, oh no, it's not complete, there are bugs. Then you need to rework. When there is a rework and you fix things, of course, you don't gain any effort points or story points, right? You don't make any new accomplishment. You just fix the old work. So that is why here no work has been counted. Okay, and since the project has to soon deliver, deadline that's approaching and so on, there could be kind of big push here. Okay, so you can really do a lot of work in one iteration. Okay, and so and so. So this is a burn down chart from the expectation against the reality. And actually, if you do this and you also note what happened in each iteration in a similar way as we show in this example, you can see that you can see the whole project happening. You can see what is wrong in the past. What shall we do further in order to prevent mistakes in the past not to happen again in the future? You can also see that somehow if you can have some big innovation, you can really improve and jump your project progress very fast. This is another example of a burn down chart. Okay, it is drawn by some other software, or even you can use Excel to draw it. So you can see from this example, there are three lines. First is estimated burn down in the blue line. And the second one is the real burn down. And the yellow one is velocity of the team. So this is very good way of representing the work remaining, the velocity of the team. And you can see there are many things that you can see from here, right? That at the very beginning, the velocity is pretty low. Okay. And later on, okay, it's improving a little bit and get down a little bit later. But later on, it's remaining very stable. And once when it is very stable, it's possible that you can actually achieve the work on time or even beyond the time if you can really be very efficient and very effective in the whole team. You see that here we finish the work even one sprint before, 1 or 2 sprints before, because the team velocity improved quite a lot at the very end of the project. So that is why the graph can burn down very fast, and that is why the name is called like that, burn down. Okay, let me wrap up Agile Scrum Framework. Remember, we do have 3 important roles: product owner, Scrum Master, and the Scrum team, development team. Okay, these are the 3 roles involved in a Scrum approach. In terms of artifacts or things that we use, we have product backlog, which summarize, include every of the work that are required to do, right, in a prioritized manner. We do have sprint backlog that are list of prioritized work that we plan to do within a particular sprint. And we do have burn down chart. Of course, we can make it burn up chart as well. Okay, it's just the opposite way, burn up or burn down, but mostly people use burn down, but you can also use burn up. In terms of ceremonies or activities that we do during the Scrum work, of course, remember we have what we call sprint. Sprint is a kind of time-boxed iteration of the project work, right? And it could last from 1 week to 4 weeks. Within a sprint, we really need to do sprint planning meeting. Okay, and in the sprint planning, of course, we take the product backlog in order to select a sprint backlog, right? And each day within a sprint, every day, we do have to do daily stand-up meeting, and that means it is kind of 24-hour sprint. That every day at the beginning, we do a kind of daily plan, right? What are we going to do today? What did we do yesterday? Have we achieved what we have achieved yesterday or not? Something like that. And we do need to review at the end of the sprint. We do have sprint review, and actually we do have sprint retrospective as well. Okay, and of course for each of the sprint, I forgot to mention that this is one of the output, right? The finished work represent the output of the sprint. So this is the overall picture. Here I show you another agile-based approach, which is called Kanban. Kanban is also very popular, but it's also very simple as well. And Kanban approach works around what we call Kanban board. So the mechanism is that at the beginning, we define what is called to do. So it's similar to product backlog or work backlog, right? It's all the work that we have to do. And it can be broken down into many of the smaller pieces of work, okay, like this, which could be a user story, which could be a bug fix, which could be a report, a meeting, whatever. And once you have a to-do list, this is the lane of the to-do list in the board. You have another lane, which is called in progress. And we have another final lane, which is completed. Okay, this is a very simple board. But of course, we will see a more sophisticated one, and actually we can revise the Kanban board to fit our need as well. There's no fixed standard Kanban board. It needs to meet the team's need. So from the to-do, of course, everyone in the team will be able to see, right, that, oh, here are these many works that we have to do. You can also do a similar way as in Scrum, that is sort them. Which one that are most important or most urgent or has the deadline to be complete first should be on the very top of the list. Then every morning or every now and then, a person, a team member will choose a card. Okay, it can be a post-it. Actually, if you have a chance to go to several of the software company or whatever organizations that make use of agile approach, it's not necessary that you must be used in software development. Nowadays, agile approach has been used not only in software but in many other of the project planning, project management as well. So this kind of board you can see a lot, and it will make use of a physical board together with a post-it. Okay, so once we have these many post-it, the people, the team members can see the physical list of work and can choose the work that he or she would like to do. Once we choose it, we pull the post-it or the card, right, from the to-do and then place it in the in progress. Then that means I'm going to do it. Okay, so you place it in the in progress and then you work on it. So in this case, it's also possible to have kind of ownership in the way that who is doing what. So you can see that this member CA, she is doing this work 104. Okay, and also it's possible that more than one team member is working on the same work. Like this one, KA and OH, they are doing on 105, okay, in the progress. And once the work is finished, complete, of course, we need to make sure that the definition of complete means user has to test it, someone has to prove it, or whatever, right? This is defined within the team and based on the nature of the work. Then you can pull that post-it, right, or that card from the in progress to the complete lane. So the mechanism of Kanban board is that everything starts from left to right. We move a card from the left lane to the next adjacent lane to the right until it reaches the complete lane. the final lane. So at the beginning, the member of the team pull a work from to do into the progress. Once you finish the in progress, then you pull that card or that work from the progress lane into the complete lane, something like this. And actually, one thing that is important to note here is that I used to emphasize this many times to many people, not only for software development, but for your own work management as well. Once you have a lot of work in progress, if there are too many, okay, let's say too many of the work in progress, if too many, it signals something. You should not have too many. Which lanes we should have too many? Definitely complete, right? And of course, there are certain rules that you can agree within the team as well, because as I said, too many of the work in progress doesn't make any value. As long as that work in progress is not moved to the complete. If you cannot move your work to the complete lane, whether it's 10%, 20% in progress, 99% in progress, it means nothing, and it means the same. So in many of the Kanban or even in Scrum as well, there are certain rules that one person, one team member may be working on not more than 2 or 3 works. So that means that this person, for example, CA, if we impose some rules of like not more than 2 works at a time, CA can work in just at most 2 works in progress, no more, because when you are working a little bit on this, a little bit on that, a little bit on the other thing, you are not finishing anything. And the value of the work we consider only when we finish it. Work in progress has no value in Agile mechanism, and maybe in also many other realistic real-world situation as well. This another example of Kanban board is a little bit more advanced, okay, but it gives detail and is very nicely designed as well. So you can see that the very left lane, first we have backlog. So it's a list of all works we have to do. And each of the post-it or the card, it includes, of course, the title of the work, how many hours required to complete the work, and the priority. So actually it includes almost everything that a user story is required to have, except some of the detail, right? But this is just example. So this is considered to be effort point, right? This is considered to be the importance or the priority of the work, and so on. And then another lane is to do. To do can be considered as kind of sprint backlog. So it's a to-do for the whole day, or it's a to-do of the whole week, or the to-do list of the whole sprint. That means you can define to-do for current iteration, something like that. That this is the whole backlog, all the works, okay? This is the work that you will do within this iteration. And in progress is what you are now doing it, what you or your team member are now working on it, okay? This will be in the in progress range. And in progress, next to the in progress, we have testing, because once you complete it, maybe someone needs to test whether it's really complete, it is up to the user requirement or not. And this testing may be done by the team, but another team member, or should be in Agile situation, we prefer that the test should be done by customer. So this is supposed to be acceptance test. You cannot claim that the work is done unless it is accepted by the customer. And once acceptance test is done, complete, satisfy, you can move it to the done lane. And of course, you might question, is it possible that we move from not only from left to right, but somehow is it possible that some work is moved from right to left? Yes, it is possible, of course. When you might realize that, oh, I think this card has already complete, but I found some error. User has notified some new requirement that has to be taken care by that one, but forgot to be taken care, something like that. So we move from this done to, no, not to testing, right? But then even to the in progress. And some, when you are doing a testing of something you think that is finished, you find that, oh no, it's not really finished. This is something we forgot. Then that testing work has to be implemented more, something like that. So it's moved to the in progress and so on. And actually, if we combine example of the previous Kanban board to this one, right? You can see that in the previous board, we should say that who is working on what. Then actually, if you physically update this board very regularly, at least every day, every half day, you know that which member is busy on what, right? And this is very good. We know that, oh, this person, he or she is doing this work, the other person, they are doing this and that work. Then we can collaborate very easily. We know that this person is almost finishing his work. Then when there are new works, we can expect that this person will be taking care of it, something like that. Here again, another Kanban board. So what do you think? It is different from the previous ones? Yes, of course. You can see that we have lanes, right? The same. The vertical lanes of story, to do, in progress, to verify, and done. But apart from that, we also have horizontal lane here, right? Horizontal lanes can also be used to partition the work into projects. Maybe you have so many projects to work on. So let's say that you use Kanban board mechanism to take care of your own project work. I mean, not only Isdm project, but all the projects, all the assignments, all the homeworks, all the things you want to do, even personal stuff. So this can be project 1. This can be project number 2. This can be a lane for project number 3, number 4, and so on. Then you can move, right? You can see that what are the progress, what are the work to be done for each of these projects, and so on. So very, very good. So I hope that you get the idea of Kanban board, you get the idea of agile mechanism, and you can apply it to your Isdm project planning and management and doing. And not even that, right? Apply it to your own entire things management. From this slide and discussion, we have discussed about using Agile approach, which is Scrum approach, Kanban approach, to manage a project. It could be a software development project, or actually it could be any kind of project as well. So apart from all these details that we discussed, one of the very important things that we should use and employ to use is project management tools. Because when you have a big complex project and when you involve several of the team members, you really need to have a tool to help you track the details, track the things, even calculate velocity, even draw or generate burn up and burn down charts, and so on. And even archive all the user stories, product backlog, and so on. Okay. Of course, we can do things manually, but it will be very much more efficient and effective to use a software project management tool. So what do we have? Popular ones include the names that listed here: Jira, Soho, Asana, Tiger, FreeCam, version 1, project, target process, and so on. And I think from the interview with project manager, the very first assignments that you have been doing together with your team, I have learned that some of the companies also make use of Jira, make use of this and that too, right? So you can plan to use some of them for your project as well. But also keep in mind that in some company they use both. They use also manual physical board of the Kanban or Scrum board. Okay, they use also the software, because the beauty of the physical board is that you can see the reality. You can move the card from left lane to right lane, so and so, and you can see who are working on what easily and physically. So that is one of the benefits of the physical board. But of course, it's not necessary that it must have a physical board for every of the project. We can use online board as well. Okay. And if you have any questions, comments, or things you want to discuss, feel free to do it in an online mode. Bye bye.